History loves its heroes. Andres Bonifacio, the great plebeian, father of the Philippine Revolution. José Rizal, the national hero, martyr, and intellectual. Emilio Aguinaldo, the first president. But behind every revolution led by men, there are women whose stories get erased, whose sacrifices get forgotten, whose courage gets reduced to footnotes. Today, we're talking about a woman who was 18 years old when she became the guardian of the Philippine Revolution's most dangerous secrets. A woman who smuggled weapons, hid documents that could get everyone executed, and kept the revolution alive while Spanish soldiers hunted her. Her name was Gregoria de Jesús, and history tried to forget her. We won't let that happen. If you're loving this series on hidden Philippine history, smash that like button, help us reach 500 likes, and subscribe, because Day 3 is about reclaiming the story of a revolutionary hero who happened to be a woman. Let's start with who Gregoria was before history knew her name. Born on May 9, 1875, in Caloocan, she grew up in a Philippines suffocating under Spanish colonial rule. By the time she was a teenager, the Philippines had been a Spanish colony for over 3 centuries. Her family wasn't wealthy, wasn't part of the Ilustrado elite. They were ordinary Filipinos living under extraordinary oppression. But Gregoria was smart, literate, and aware of the injustices around her. When she met Andres Bonifacio in 1893, she was 17 years old. He was 30, already a passionate advocate for independence, already planning revolution. They married in 1894, and this is where most history books stop. They tell you Gregoria was Bonifacio's wife, and that's it. Maybe they mention she supported his work, but that's like saying the foundation supports a building. Technically true, but completely missing the point. Gregoria wasn't just a supportive wife. She was a revolutionary operative in her own right, and her role was so critical that without her, the Katipunan might have been discovered and destroyed before it could spark the revolution. In 1892, Bonifacio founded the Katipunan, the secret society dedicated to Philippine independence through armed revolution. Everything about the Katipunan had to be secret. If the Spanish discovered who the members were, it meant torture and execution. The Katipunan kept lists of members, correspondence between leaders, plans for uprisings, details of weapons caches. This information was dynamite. If the Spanish got their hands on it, the entire revolution would collapse before it began. Someone had to keep these documents safe. That someone was Gregoria de Jesús. Imagine being 18 or 19 years old and being trusted with information that could get hundreds of people killed. Gregoria didn't just file these papers in a safe location. She memorized names. She sewed documents into the lining of her clothing. When Spanish soldiers set up checkpoints, she walked through them, carrying revolution manifestos hidden against her skin. If she was caught, torture wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. Execution would follow. She knew this. She did it anyway. Gregoria became known as the Lakambini of the Katipunan, a title that means roughly the muse or the princess. But that translation doesn't capture what it really meant. The Lakambini wasn't a ceremonial position. She was the keeper of secrets, the trusted guardian of the revolution's most sensitive information. Other women in the Katipunan looked to her for leadership. She organized a network of women who supported the revolution, not by fighting with guns, though some did, but by doing the invisible work that made revolution possible. What was that invisible work? Moving weapons and ammunition through Spanish checkpoints. Women could often pass through with less scrutiny than men, and Gregoria coordinated these smuggling operations, providing safe houses for revolutionaries on the run. delivering messages between Katipunan cells when communication was too dangerous for men who were being watched, feeding revolutionaries, treating their wounds, keeping their families together when the men went off to fight, recruiting other women to the cause. And all of this while Spanish authorities were actively hunting for Katipunan members. In 1896, the revolution exploded into open warfare. The cry of Pugad Lawin, or Balintawak, depending on which historical account you follow, marked the beginning of the Philippine Revolution. Bonifacio and his men tore up their cedulas, their tax certificates, a symbolic rejection of Spanish authority, and declared armed revolution. Gregoria was there, not watching from the sidelines. There, participating in one of the most important moments in Philippine history. As the revolution spread, Gregoria's role became even more dangerous. She accompanied Bonifacio on campaigns, not as baggage, but as an operative. When the Katipunan needed to coordinate with different revolutionary cells, she carried messages. When they needed to know which Spanish officials could be bribed or intimidated, she gathered intelligence. Spanish forces weren't just fighting men with guns. They were fighting an entire network, and Gregoria was central to that network. Then came 1897, and everything fell apart. Not because of Spanish military victories, but because of Filipino betrayal. Emilio Aguinaldo, who had taken control of the revolutionary government in Cavite, saw Bonifacio as a threat. The revolution split into factions. Aguinaldo's forces arrested Bonifacio on charges of treason and sedition. This wasn't Spanish colonizers arresting a Filipino revolutionary. This was Filipinos arresting their own revolutionary leader in a power struggle. Gregoria watched as her husband was subjected to a sham trial. Bonifacio, who had started the revolution, who had organized the Katipunan from nothing, was convicted by fellow Filipinos of crimes against a revolution he had founded. On May 10, 1897, Aguinaldo's soldiers took Bonifacio and his brother Procopio to the mountains of Maragondon, Cavite, and executed them. Gregoria was 22 years old and suddenly a widow. Gregoria was forced to remarry for survival. In 1898, she married Julio Nakbil, another Katipunan member and close friend of Bonifacio. Some historians judge her for this, as if a 23-year-old widow in the middle of a war had luxury of choices. She had 8 children with Nakbil and lived a long life, dying in 1943 at the age of 68. But here's what's crucial. She never stopped talking about Bonifacio. She never stopped defending his legacy. She never stopped insisting that he was the true hero of the Philippine Revolution. For decades, official Philippine history, heavily influenced by those loyal to Aguinaldo, minimized Bonifacio's role and completely erased Gregoria. Textbooks mentioned her, if at all, as Bonifacio's wife. Her role as the Lakambini, her courage, her intelligence work, her leadership among revolutionary women, all of it disappeared. It was as if she never existed, beyond being married to a man who was executed by his own comrades. Why does this matter? Because Gregoria's erasure represents a larger pattern in how we tell history. Revolutionary movements are never just men with guns. They require logistics, intelligence networks, safe houses, medical care, food supplies, communication systems. Women do most of this work. Then, when historians write about the revolution, they focus on battles and famous men, and all the work that actually sustained the revolution becomes invisible. Gregoria de Jesús reminds us that revolution is a collective effort. The Katipunan succeeded not because Bonifacio was a brilliant leader, though he was, but because hundreds of people, many of them women, did dangerous, unglamorous work every single day. Gregoria kept secrets that could have gotten everyone killed. She smuggled weapons and messages. She organized networks of support. She risked torture and execution repeatedly. Without her, the revolution might have been crushed before it truly began. Her story also highlights the tragedy of the Philippine Revolution. Bonifacio wasn't killed by Spanish colonizers. He was killed by Filipinos in a power struggle. Gregoria had to watch the revolution she helped build turn on itself. She had to live with the knowledge that her husband's death wasn't a heroic sacrifice for independence, but a political assassination by supposed allies. That's a grief beyond measure. Today, there are some monuments to Gregoria, some recognition of her role. The way even less significant male revolutionaries are. School children learn about the father of the revolution. They don't learn about the Lakambini, who kept the revolution's secrets and made Bonifacio's work possible. Gregoria de Jesús lived through Spanish colonization, the Philippine Revolution, the Philippine-American War, American colonial rule, and the Japanese occupation. She witnessed the entire transformation of the Philippines, from Spanish colony to American territory to occupied nation to independent republic. She died in 1943, just 2 years before the Philippines would finally achieve true independence. She almost made it to see the freedom she had fought for as a teenager. If this story of a forgotten hero moved you, hit that like button and let's get to 500 likes. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow, day 4, we're uncovering a republic within a republic. A brief moment when Zamboanga created its own government that practiced true pluralism and respected Muslim autonomy. These hidden stories matter. These forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered, and we're making sure their names live on. Gregoria de Jesús, not just Bonifacio's wife, the Lakambini of the Katipunan, a revolutionary in her own right. Remember her name.